Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to spend this Sunday with all of you and our special guest, Henrik Karlsson. And Henrik is joining us from Denmark, I believe. And after an eclectic career spanning education, poetry, software, and an art gallery, he now writes thought-provoking and well-loved essays at Escaping Flatland that explore how disciplined introspection and iterative design can help us build meaningful lives and relationships. So thank you so much, Henrik, for joining us today.
Yeah. Thank you for taking care of this. That'll be fun.
Yeah, I'm excited. So just to start things, because we have people who are very familiar with your writing as well as newcomers, tell us a little bit about the inspiration behind Escaping Flatland. How did you come up with the name and how did you start writing?
Yeah. The name is a pure accident, but I think it's like a Freudian slip or something because I started it just sort of as a small experiment, and I needed to have a name. Um, so that must have been in May 2021, and obviously I had no readers. I didn't expect it would go anywhere, so I wanted to try put a few essays online. I was sort of hoping that maybe if I did that, I would like meet some friends. And like be able to have some interesting intellectual conversations. And so I just picked the name. But like later on, like it does seem like it fits because it really has felt like, because that it's a story by Edwin Abbott about a square who lives in Flatland, and then he meets spheres and like discovers there's like a three-dimensional world that he doesn't sort of know about, and that's really how it's felt, just writing. And like quite soon, I started meeting really interesting people, and they'd start to send book recommendations, and we'd have seminars and do things and talk, and that sort of fed back into the writing. So it became this kind of snowballing that has in very deep ways changed my life. And so it started as a way of sort of making friends and thinking about things I was interested in. But like the reason why I've kept going is that I've found it to be such an incredible excuse to just sit with like important things that I want to internalize more deeply. So, I'll think about agency or problem solving or things like that, or relationships, because it's like an excuse for me to sit for 100, 150 hours thinking about it, talking about with my wife, reading books. It's just like a very good excuse to sort of like massage these things into my mind and like clear my head. And it really, like, I feel that every essay I'm a little bit of a changed person, and so that's sort of the motivation for me. And then like hopefully the exhaust from that process is useful for other people too.
Yeah, so that leads to one of the questions I had about the concept of unfolding, which is very prevalent in the way you write and the way you share your journey with all of your readers. It's a concept from Christopher Alexander. So, how did you come across it? And what about that term resonated with you and led you to begin applying this approach to your life?
Yeah, so I came across it when we were designing the garden at the house. We're my wife is Johanna is very sort of obsessed with like doing everything at a very high level. So we're like if we're going to design a garden, we need to go like to the sort of fundamental principles of design. And so we started reading a lot of design theory and things like that. And that turned out to be really useful for all sorts of things, because you can think about everything as a design problem, like writing an essay, relationships, all sorts of things can be sort of approached like design problems. So that's sort of become a very staple in my head. Um, and I think I resonated with the idea of unfolding, which is, to put it very simply, just the idea of sort of iterating. Instead of having a big vision, you sort of pay attention to what works and what doesn't work, what is exciting, what is a sort of what fits and what's a misfit, and then you try to remove the things that you don't like, and you try to lean into the things you like. That's sort of this very simple version of that. And I guess I resonated with it because I'm sort of naturally in that direction. I've never been able to have like a long-term goal for my life, or everything has just, when I've been trying to do that, it's just been fumbling and it's been dead ends. And so I kind of resonated with that, but also in Christopher Alexander's work, I mean, he's thinking about this at a much deeper level. So I had been doing that, but I'd been doing it sort of as trial and error. And unfolding is not exactly trial and error. It's a more deliberate process where you sort of try to more. So I'd been kind of fumbling around, but finding a way that is similar to what I was doing, trial and error, but at a more refined level where you're actually sort of more in a more deliberate way trying to map the context and trying to like introspect and pay close attention to what resonates and like iteratively sort of articulate experiments that you want to try and do. So it's sort of a sort of a refined version of trial and error in a way. So it was both something that I recognized myself in, but it was also like taking something I was doing to a higher level. Uh, and it just feels like everything good in my life has come from those sorts of process of just like having a like I met my wife, let's just have interesting conversation in a bookstore, and you talk again and again, like there was no goal to that. It wasn't like a list. I want to achieve this. It's just this is an interesting conversation. Just keep talking and and like a lot of my writing career started with I was at a poetry reading and I really liked this really talented poet in Sweden called Niklas Mesaros, and I just sort of asked like, do you want me to show you the way to the train station? And we started talking, and then I sort of said, oh, I also write poems. I'd like written half a poem. And he said, yeah, you send them to me. And I was like, oh, then I have to do that. And I sent him, and then he sort of became a mentor, and I started touring with him. So all cool things in my life has just kind of been, I was excited about something, and then I did it, and it went bad, and it went good, and I paid attention. But with Christopher Alexander's work, it just gave this higher level to it where I could be more deliberate and structured about that kind of trial and error.
Yeah. So how do you learn to feel comfortable with that? Because for a lot of people, this process of experimentation can be nerve-wracking, or it can feel like you have to pay attention to a lot of things very carefully that don't necessarily align with what you thought your life might be or what a good life should look like. And you're learning as part of that experimentation, which can be frightening. So how did you come to become comfortable with that? And how would you encourage people to begin, given that it can be nerve-wracking?
Yes, I think, I mean, the two thoughts that come to mind is that it can be hard for like two reasons. One is the sort of social reasons. It's like you look stupid, like everyone was like throughout my entire 20s, everyone's like, what are you doing, Henrik? Like you're a talented guy. Why are you such a fuck up? And so that can be a little bit uncomfortable. Uh, I've personally never been all that bothered by that. So I'm not probably not the best person to sort of explain how to not care about that. But I could try to think about that more. And the other part of it, which I have felt, is that you have to have a sense of abundance. Because if you're in a situation where you like, so I think a classic mistake people do is like feel stuck in a life, and then they save up some money and they quit a job and they're like, I'm gonna do a 1 year sort of sabbatical and I'm gonna figure this out. And then the clock is on and you see your money in the bank account go down, and it's a very stressful situation, and that puts you in a sort of scarcity mindset, and that's very, very, very hard to unfold in that situation. And I mean, there's a lot of statistics on this, like especially if you look at entrepreneurs, for example, like you have a higher likelihood to succeed as an entrepreneur if you keep your day job and iterate on the side, because you can have sort of abundance mindset and you can think more long term and you can try things. So just like figuring out like some baseline of keeping your needs met, like social needs, economic needs, all that, and then carving out space on the side so you have some space that you can be wasteful with, because it's a wasteful process. It's a like a it's a very like craft like process where you're not like just pasting something together, you're staying with problems for a long time, and therefore like if you have a sense of a deadline that you have to deliver, that's not gonna work. So I think those two things have just like, for some reason you have to be comfortable with people thinking you're an idiot, and you also need to have some sense of sort of material and social security, that you have some people maybe who like you and some money so you can succeed, because without that, I think it's gonna be so hard to keep an open enough mind.
Yeah, I think that part is underrated. Maybe it's the phase of life that I'm in right now. I see a lot of people going on sabbaticals, and people take 3, 6, 1 year off, and then come back feeling uncertain or feeling pressured by the confines of that. Whereas you and others, such as I think Charles Handy has this concept of the second curve, will say like you have to be, before even launching into the next thing, like start early, start experimenting, pay attention. And then once you pick up momentum, maybe it's that it feels more safe to launch into the next big thing. So I think this is
Yeah.
pretty
I remember like
underrated.
I sort of figured this out when I was 25. And then I like the mental model I had was that I want to sort of grow by saying no. It's like because I saw so many, I had seen some friends who were sort of scaling companies and they were scaling by saying yes, like more customers, more employees, and eventually, you know, it grew to a mess and their lives were terrible. And I didn't want to do that. So I sort of reckon like I'm gonna get better and better at what I'm doing, and I'm gonna improve. And every time I get more resources, I'm gonna use those resources to like remove something I don't like from my life. So I like gradually lowered the amount of time I worked, for example. So like now I don't work at all, but like on the last like 2 years, I only worked like 20 hours a week at the art gallery, you know, because I'd carved out and saved up some money. So I was always like trying to reinvest things into to saying no and no to more and more things. And I think that's sort of a good way of thinking. I'm sort of losing the thread here, but I think that's a sort of a good way of so you have some starting point and then you're trying to sort of improve it on the margin all the time. It's really hard to solve it in one big go.
Shiva, I think you had a question on this thread. Do you want to um, chat about it?
Sure, thanks. I put this in the chat because I think I have a noise issue with my headphones.
It's fine.
Am I audible?
Good.
Okay, awesome. No, I just want to pull on a thread that we mentioned around pursuing side projects when you already have a job. Um, Curious, like what I've struggled with is when you have a steady job, there's a sense of security already that gives a lesser sense of urgency to kind of do the side project and take it far. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And like I've struggled with that, and I'm just curious if you had thoughts on navigating that because you have this security in your day job, and that tend to takes you into like a complacent mode.
Yeah,
And
yeah, that's
so
interesting.
uh,
I think my response, like, I guess what I've done is that I've never allowed myself to get complacent because I always lived, like, for all of those years, I always lived like a student. Like, I kind of had my level as a student. And then once I earned more money, I just put that aside. I never increased my means. I always saw it as sort of funding capital for whatever projects I wanted to do. So by that way of like, and that created the urgency because I was always like my life kind of sucked because I didn't have any money, even though I did save up money. But and that sort of created some urgency. So I bet there could be a situation, and I've not been in that where you sort of increase and you live closer to your means and that becomes comfortable. So. And I don't know how to get out of it. Maybe you can sort of lower your means a little bit, and and then you'll be very urgent to get back up again.
Mary, you had a question too.
Hey, Henrik, from New Zealand.
Hi.
I'm just thinking about significant others. So it's all very nice to say those abstract people, I don't care what they think. But what happens if your children or your wife doesn't want you to do what you're doing and they're like hassling you and saying, hey, Henrik, go on, make more money, stop doing
Yeah,
that.
yeah. They well, what in my life, what has happened is that they've dumped me. Sort of historically, like I've been like this all the time. So, um, I don't like. I think it can be for if you're like when I was younger, I dated some people who were like more normally wired and wanted a like stable normal life. And I think it would be unfair to push my kind of life onto them. And they kind of quickly realized this. It's pretty. You have to have a specific taste to date me, because I am strange and I live in strange ways. Um, but like if you're in the situation where you rely on people, yeah, it's an extra burden. like you have to, I mean, my kids, like I have to care for my kids, and that is like, there's sometimes that's extremely hard to like balance those things. And of course, like I have to, my kids are more important than like my writing or whatever. But I think it can, like that sort of ties back to the urgency, like that adds urgency, because that adds things to your thing. But you'll have to negotiate that and sort of figure out that line. But it's hard to say, because every time I've tried, they've dumped me. So I don't know. But I think like all relationships have to be based on conversation, and like trying to, like if you are feeling that way and the other person is scared or want to pursue other things, like having an open conversation about that, and like trying to reach a mutual understanding of what you're giving up and what they're giving up, and trying to be creative in designing around that. So maybe, there might be, there's not like, there are trade-offs, but there's also, sometimes you can also be more clever around how you design around the trade-offs. It's hard to speak in the abstract here, but it's really easy to sort of think that like, oh, I want this and the other person wants that. But if you try to sort of tunnel down more deeply into the sort of, if you go back to Christopher Alexander and try to understand the context of what precisely is it that this person is maybe afraid of or want me to do, and what precisely is it I need? And if you get more detailed about that, you get a more sort of high resolution. You might see there's actually some synergies. There's actually maybe certain ways. So like getting away from thinking about it in these like strong trade-offs, and seeing it more as, so for example, with Johanna and me, so we were similar in the way that we both like optimized really hard for like pursuing things that are meaningful to us, and giving up a lot of money along the way. But we did have sort of different priorities at certain points. So I remember like quite early on, Johanna wanted to move into the countryside to live very cheaply, so she could be able to work on her projects, and I didn't want to do that, because I was like in the literary world and I wanted to be in the city. And then we had to sort of unpack that, like how do we find a solution that is like cheap and in the countryside, what she wants, and also allows me to go to the city and take part in the literary world. And that was a hard design problem, but we were able to sort of eventually find a house that sort of met those needs, so she could get what she needed and I could get, like, and we both made sacrifices. There were trade-offs, but the trade-offs were much smaller than like she getting what she wanted or me getting what we wanted. We both got like 80% of what we wanted by being more deliberate about how we designed the solution.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes, of course.
I guess just having listened to you, Henrik, I guess perhaps my underlying question is this really possible to do when you've got all the other things around you going on? So you've got your work and your family and all those demands, and as they escalate, how easy is it to continue to be doing this process of iteration? And
It's hard. It is the short answer, right? Because there are sacrifices, right? So I have a post called like "Don't sacrifice the wrong thing," because that's the thing, right? You're going to sacrifice something, right? You might, you can't like always be present for your friends and train for a marathon and run a startup and write a successful blog or whatever. Like you can't do all of those things at the same time. So you've got to sort of sit down and sort of think about the priorities and things, and be willing to say like, oh, maybe I'm going to see these friends a little bit less because I need to carve out some time from this. And but I think you can get a long way sort of with sort of unfolding and iterating by sort of saying, I'm gonna carve out like, let's say 15 hours for myself every week. That's not like a crazy amount. That's 2 hours a day. You could probably sort of negotiate your way to that, like if you're willing to sort of maybe like for 2 years, I would go up at like 5 in the morning and I would go straight to the desk and I would write from 5 to 9 in the morning, because that way I could carve out like 25, 30 hours a week to write. and that sacrificed and that meant for that period I couldn't have like these cozy long evenings with my wife. So and that was hard on us for that while, because we maybe only had time to talk for half an hour after the kids fell asleep. But we sort of negotiated, and then sometimes we had to pause that to have time with each other. But like that was a trade-off that we discussed, and we chose to do that. But I think it's very easy to be unthinking about these trade-offs because you're making these priorities all the time. Uh, and you're always saying no to things. But it's very easy, for example, to say no to, well, like some friend calls you and says, "Do you want to come along?" It's hard to say no to that. Or if work says something, wants you to do something, it's hard. And so it's easy to sort of say no to yourself and end up with nothing for yourself, and that probably drains a lot of, because that space of unfolding and giving like 15 hours a week for yourself or whatever, also is sort of when at least I'm filling up energy so I can be better at my work or a better father. So that time for me is sort of non-negotiable to find some level. But then you'll have to sort of, and I've often maybe had like carved out like 30 or sometimes 40 hours a week for doing that, and that's probably not doable for most people. And I was doing it like while we were homeschooling and I was having a job, so it was like too much intense. But I think 15 hours a week, if you're willing to sort of actually sit down and think about the sacrifice and prioritize, is doable. I mean, we're awake 144 hours a week or something like that. So it's only like 10% of the time.
Vivian, I think you had a similar question on this thread. Did you have any follow-ups, or do you think Henrik covered most of what you had questions about?
Yeah, I think you addressed, thank you, Henrik. I think you addressed the question. Maybe just a follow-up, because so for me, partly the issue is finding the time, but also like the energy, right? So it's very easy for me to fall into this pattern where I'm giving my best sort of mental energy to my job. And so even if later I can carve out the time, I find like mentally I'm just tired.
Yeah.
And so I need to get better at like saving a little piece of that.
Yeah, that's
mental
why I ended up
energy.
doing the mornings, because the mornings are my best energy, right? And
Yeah.
and I did 4 hours. That's pretty intense. But like taking
Yeah.
like half an hour or an hour in the morning for yourself is like you don't have to give all your best hours to your employer.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm going to read out a question in the chat from Maya. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. So she noted, Henrik, in your blog post 6 Lessons About Agency, you write about the best artists who answer their emails quickly and work professionally rather than appear confused or complain. So the question is, does that also translate into advice for people wanting to pursue creative pursuits? And that if you're confused, is it just better not to do it? And how much confusion is manageable and figure outable to still succeed?
Yeah, so the confusion part is hard. So there's like several parts to that. So like I worked in an art gallery. I've put up maybe 150 art exhibitions in my day, and it's always very interesting to sort of observe. You see you have, I'm in the same room and I have different people come into the room, and after a few days it's going to be transformed into something, and sometimes it's magical and sometimes it doesn't work. And then you can ask, like, can I predict by just seeing the person walk into the room how it's going to look afterwards? And one of, and part of it is so the ones that ended up making magical experiences, they were always really rapid at answering the email. They were really pleasant, never complaining, and I think that part is always good advice, of like shouldering the responsibility and like trying to be fun to be around and easy to work with, because yeah, it's especially in the art world, a lot of people think they're supposed to be like divas or whatever. That doesn't work, because this is a collaborative game. Any type of sort of worthwhile endeavor means you're gonna have to build relationships with people, and if they're not excited to be around you and work with you, it's gonna be really hard to sort of keep growing. And the other part of that is that so that's kind of easy. You just like shape up and do that. But the other part is that when you saw the really good artists come in, they'd be like, look at the space, and then they'd just settle on an idea, and that idea would be great from the start, and they wouldn't be confused, and they just deliver. That is, of course, takes more practice. It's not something that you can just like have. But I think there's some lessons you can learn from that. So a mistake a lot of creative people do is that, like, when you're in the idea phase, it's really good to throw things on the wall, have a billion things going on. But once you start building sort of an exhibition or an essay or a song, it's really good. You shouldn't like, so some artists I worked with, they would come like with literally like 2 trucks and just take all of their stuff in there, and they would be overwhelmed, they would be chaotic, and there would be problems. That doesn't work. So what the good artists that they did, they looked at the space and they got inspired and felt, oh, this, I want to do this, and then they took one thing, like one idea of all of their hundreds of ideas they had, like this idea would be really cool in this space. Or this, and in essays, it's like this idea is really strong. So you start with one thing and you forget about everything else. And once you have that, it's easier. Like, and then you put, like, for example, that art piece into a gallery, and then you ask, okay, could I bring anything else into this room that is gonna elevate what's already there? And then you take another thing in, and that's a much easier thing to solve. I already have this painting, like, can I put another painting that's going to make the first painting look even better? Okay, this one will actually make it, that I'll put that in. And then you ask the same question again and again. And like, so, and this also goes back to like Christopher Alexander and design theory, right? So he's saying about like, you're creating centers. So like in an art gallery, for example, a painting is a center. That's like something that gathers your attention. And you start with one center, and then you ask, so what are the latent centers? What are the sort of things that this center, this thing that I've already decided on, what is that asking to bring in? I want to add something here that would elevate what's already there. And then you get a feeling, oh, maybe this is, whatever, I have a painting behind me. And this is kind of sad. Like, what could I put next to this to make it more interesting? Because if I put another like girl with their turn backwards, that would just maybe not add much. But like if I put like I don't know, what could I put next to this to make this one more interesting? And that's interesting. Then you can start thinking about that, and then you find something. So that's sort of a more structured process where you are kind of less confused. If you're simplifying down to like what are the good core things instead of just bringing everything you're interested into it. I'm not sure if that answered the question.
Yeah, well, she says thank you, so it does answer the question. I'm going to read out a follow-up for Mary, which will also flow into the questions I have about your writing and your writing process. So as you approach iteration and experimentation, how do you do that? Do you start by writing in your journal? Do you draw things out? Do you think through things? Do you have conversations? Is it a combination of all of these things? Does it depend on the project that you're pursuing?
So I see my job as sort of the most important part is sort of doing all the preparatory work for having ideas. So I'm doing all of the things that whoever asked that question mentioned, right? So I'm always journaling, I'm always reading, I'm always like I have millions of questions that I'm pursuing. So and I feel it's like what do you call it in English? Like where you compost, right? I'm heaping more and more material all the time, and I'm like, my entire life, it's like if you're gonna be a professional writer, it's almost like being a sort of professional athlete or something, because you have to sort of structure your entire life around that pursuit, because it's really hard to get paid, so you have to be really, really hardworking, and that means like my entire life is sort of structured around that, like who should I be talking to, because like certain people I talk to will generate ideas, what kind of books, and I need to have like because I read like maybe 1 or 2 books a week, I have to have like constant pipeline of books, not any books, but like the kind of books that provoke ideas in me. And then I'm like gathering quotes from that, and I'm writing down my reflections all the time in my journal or on Substack notes or in the essays, and I'm having conversations, and then there will be a question, and I'll reach out to someone and I'll interview them about that. It's an ever ongoing process that is sort of, well, it's not part of the vision, like it's not goal directed. Like most of that is very sort of open-ended. I'm not sure when or if this is gonna turn into an essay. Sometimes it's like more goal directed with a specific essay later on, but I think I'm sort of forgetting the question a little bit. What was the
It's an
question?
open-ended question about your process for iterating, like what processes you undertake.
Yeah, exactly. So it's so a big part of what I'm doing is sort of endlessly generating material, and then sort of as I was saying with the gallery, you're sort of writing, making mainly paintings, and then once you're going into the gallery, you ask like, and then I start looking through my notes, or I'll get excited about like, what do I have here that is really beautiful, really interesting, and I'll bring that out, and then I'll start thinking, okay, what can I do to sort of strengthen this, and then I go through that process of like, okay, I have this sort of idea that I had when I read that book, and and I have some quotes from that book, and I'll summarize those, and I'll write down my reflections, and then I'll ask, where's this pointing? Like, what more could I bring in? And I usually, since I have like notes from like hundreds of books I've read and so on, I could go through that archive and start pulling things out, and I'll think, and I'll have conversations, and this is a very, very time consuming process. This takes like, once I sort of settle on something, it takes me 100 hours or something on average. Of just sort of writing. I'll write a draft, and I'll write along with my wife. Putting things out there, and then looking at it and noticing like, where do I get excited and where do I get frustrated, and removing things, and then I'll end up with something very far from where I started, because I've sort of, it's like you're opening, like I'm putting my thoughts on the paper, and then there's a bunch of doors there, like there's things I'm confused about or questions, and I start opening those doors, and I don't know, and behind each doors there are more doors, and I don't know exactly where I'm going, but eventually I'll notice that, like, this thing and this thing and this thing belongs together, and it's good, and now I have a piece.
How do you arrive at a stopping point and decide that you're ready to share something with the world? Because you could go on this process forever.
Yeah, but I have to put out like, I have deadlines, right? So I try to put out a piece every 2 or 3 weeks. So that means at some point I'll start get stressed, and I'll be like, what's the thing that's closest? Like, which apple is closest to falling to the ground? And then at that point I'll switch into a more sort of goal directed thing, where I'm like, I'm gonna make this work now. But I try to yes, I'll try to sort of spend my time between those modes, sort of an exploratory divergent mode and a more convergent, but I use sort of deadlines. So if I don't want to spend more than like 100 or 200 hours on something, then I'll start to feel really bad about it, because I'm ashamed. I think people think I'm like just sleeping or something. So I'll try to push myself. So having some sort of deadline is good. And so sometimes like when people ask me how to sort of get started with writing, I think that like having a time-based deadline to work on projects is a pretty good idea. So like when you're starting out, maybe you just ask yourself, what's the best thing I can do in an hour? And then you work for an hour, and the best thing you can do there is the best thing you could do, and then you say you publish that or you're finished. So you use, and that sort of sets the bar, because you can become a perfectionist, right? So you can decide, so I'm gonna do a 1 hour piece. So like when I'm writing on Substack Notes, for example, which is the sort of social media thing that Substack does, I have a deadline. I can only work on these for 10 minutes. So I'm gonna do the best thing I can do in 10 minutes. Whereas on my post, I think I'll do the best thing I can do in 100 hours. But by sort of giving myself different amounts of time, I can sort of calibrate the quality level, but set some kind of finish date, so I don't just endlessly diverge.
So you're also just a big proponent of writing as a way to clarify your thoughts and create some level of rigidity around what you think and whether those thoughts hold water. Can you tell us a bit about how conversation plays into that? Because in a fluid medium like conversation, you can always say, I didn't mean it like this way or that way, as you write in one of your posts. But at the same time, they can also be very valuable for shaping your thinking and challenging it. What can we gain from conversation that's harder to get from just writing and experimenting on paper?
Well, you can think about it as sort of dialing up and down sort of rigor. And so the more rigor you have, the slower things go, and but the deeper you can go. Whereas sort of but in a conversation there's like very little rigor, you're just flowing, and that means you can travel much further, so it's like a broad search. So conversations can be really good for that sort of exploratory early phase where you're just going far, but once you sort of find something that feels alive and important, or this is something I really, or it could be like a problem in my life, I really, we were talking about earlier, how can I carve out time in my life, that question is very important to me. I need to figure this out. Then maybe a conversation then that question is worth more than just a conversation. That's worth sitting down to actually write down and structure. And then you're raising the rigor, and it's going to take more time. It's going to be slower. So there's a trade-off like between depth and breadth of search. So conversation is good for like the fast, broad search. And then I switch to writing when I have something that this feels like it would be valuable if I could reach deeper or get a deeper understanding of. And because there's like, once you start writing down, you realize a lot of those things you were saying in conversation was just ungrounded, filled with sort of logical holes and reasoning errors and all of that. But it's really hard to catch that when you're moving so fast in conversation. But when I force myself to write down in like very concrete claims, like what exactly am I claiming in sort of positive terms, like not just like riffing vaguely, but like what precisely are the claims I'm doing, like, and trying to write that in very concrete terms. And then I'll start sort of interrogating myself. So I'm okay, but why do I believe that? Do I have 3 examples of where that has happened, or like what are some counter examples? And I can start probing that in a more systematic way. And that of course takes more time, but it's extremely, if it's an important topic or question or problem, the value of like discovering that you're wrong about some assumption is very high. Like if you think that like, well, my wife and I have such divergent needs, right? So we can't work here. We have to divorce, right? Because we want to go different ways. If you can sit with that and unpack that and like work through the actual sort of details and assumptions and constraints, and discover that, oh, this assumption, I was actually wrong about this sort of underlying assumption, and then if I switch that, I can actually see a solution, and we don't have to divorce, right? That's a really big thing. So in certain areas, it's really worth really searching deeply to switch the assumptions and find where you're wrong, because like the payoff of like getting 10% smarter about this topic is very high.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions in the chat. So Pierre George, would you like to speak first, and then we will call on Amy?
Certainly. Hi, everyone. Henrik, I read my son, who's 23 years old, your essay probably 10 times, the foundational essay that we're discussing. And so I have a business background, not a creative background. And I have reached a point in my life where I want to be able to partner with younger operators and help them run a business. And so I've decided to apply the mental model to my quest, which is ongoing. And I broke it down into 3 segments. Do I want to just be partnered with someone? Do I want to operate a business? Or I want the cash that comes with operating a business? And I haven't answered all 3 questions yet, just so you know. So my specific question about the mental model is in the bottom of my paragraph. To increase the efficiency of iterative unfolding, one, increase the quality of information I get. So in my context, I've been talking to a lot of older folks who have transitioned from one career to buying a business. And I'm not talking guys who are buying Dunkin' Donuts here. I'm talking to people who are buying sizable operating businesses that, have room to scale. And it's not tech startups. In my specific field, it's medical equipment. And then I have struggled a bit with getting good quality of data. So that's number one. So I'm interested in your thoughts on how you increase the efficiency in which you get clean data from talking to people in your field, whether it's creative or business. And then secondly, I'm very sensitive and perceptive to your, how do you eliminate confirmation bias? Because as I do my quest to talk to a lot of entrepreneurs and operators, I'm afraid of, following the advice of the last person I spoke to. And I want to make sure that I have enough data, clean data, and I've surveyed enough people to come up with a good mental model. So can you reflect on that and guide us a little bit on those two concepts?
Yeah, so let me try to rephrase the questions back to make sure that I got it. So one question is like you're trying to gather, like you're moving on a new project here, and you're trying to get a deeper understanding, and you're not sure you're getting the quality of data you want to make a good decision here. Is that the first question?
Well, I don't know when enough is enough, because I've been talking to a bunch of people and I've received different perspective. I've got my list of topics, things that are important. I just don't know how you create a model where you decide that enough is enough and that you should just follow your instincts after documenting and getting some hard facts.
So let's start with that one, and you'll remind me of the other question later. So I think one thing I try to do is sort of articulate predictions, right? So if you're talking to someone and they're making certain claims or they're having certain frameworks, what are the sort of implicit predictions? They're predicting that this thing will be true or this thing will happen if I do that. And if you can sort of operationalize what people are, the sort of implicit predictions, it's hard when we don't have a concrete example here. But then you can test that. Like if they're saying like you should do this, then maybe you can just run a small experiment and do that thing in a like low cost way, and does that actually end up with a good outcome, right? For example, that would confirm that prediction that they are making implicitly, right? So because ultimately what you're trying to do is to be able to predict what action you're on a quest, you're gonna take certain actions, and you're trying to predict which actions will lead to the outcomes that I want. And you're not exactly sure about the outcomes, but you're trying to get clear on that too. But unless you're actually sort of moving toward making and testing those predictions, it's really hard to know if your mental model are actually improving, because you can gather data, but the measure of the quality of that data is that it allows you to solve the problems or make the good decisions you want to make. And it can be like in your case, like if you're gonna buy a big business or something, that's obviously like you can't just like run an experiment by putting a lot of capital in and it's gonna blow up in your face if the prediction is wrong. But often you can like find other ways of like making prediction. And if you see that, like if you're talking to one operator, for example, and you see that certain of their implicit predictions of what they're saying are going to be easier to test, you can just like look up that number, or you can just go talk to one and try talking. And if they're consistently, if they're the things they're saying and their models are consistently leading to the outcome that is implicit, then you can sort of trust them more. And if you're talking to someone and they're saying something that you know is obviously false, right? Because you have experience enough, like that's bullshit, then probably that person, it's much likelier that the other things they're saying is also not grounded. But if you find someone that is reliably saying things where the predictions hold true, like when I tried that thing they did, it worked. When I tried that thing, it worked. And I know the thing they said, and I've seen they do it, it worked. Then you can start doing that, and then you can try to start to think, can I do some small scale experiment? Maybe I don't buy a business, but maybe can I go in and you spend a day there hanging out, and I'm gonna have these concrete predictions about how that's gonna look. And if it's not true, then maybe you'll be you'll be surprised, and hopefully you're surprised in a good way. But if you're surprised in a bad way, you go back and sort of think through what am I confused about here? Why was my prediction not correct here? And then that opens new questions, and then maybe you go talk to other people to sort of address that specific confusion. Does that sort of address your first question?
So I'm trying to synthesize your answer. Are you saying if you sample 10 different people and ask them the same question and you get, say, 60% same answer, then that's your way to move forward in your mental model because you got more than a majority of answers being the same, and that's your fact check?
Not necessarily, right? If one of these, like, let's say we're talking to business founders, like if one of these people were, say, like Sam Altman, and I trusted that he was being candid with me and saying what he was thinking, then I would value his judgment a lot higher. And even if he said he was in the minority, the only one who said something, I would probably trust that because if I've been able to sort of validate that his predictions are true. So the important thing is, like, can I trust the prediction quality of this model or this person? And some people will be outliers. So it's not necessarily the consensus that is the right thing. It's like whoever is like best at this, at making these predictions. And there's people are going to be very differently good at this. So if you can find one person who's better, then it might be a minority position that is right.
Clear.
Great. Amy, you had a question. Okay, I'll read it out. Unless you're on the line.
Yeah, I just got on. Yeah, I just want to know what's your process for prioritizing ideas that actually equally excites you. And I'm talking about like essay ideas, for example, like you have like multiple essays that's just like, wow, these are all really interesting to deep dive in and have so many doors that would be fairly intriguing. How do you go about that process of prioritizing and choosing, or do you do parallel processing, etc.?
Yeah, I do a lot of parallel processing. So once I do go into like full essay mode and I'm thinking this is going to be something that's going to go on a blog, then I know I'm in for like 100-hour commitment. So then at that point, I'm going to have to be prioritized really hard. But what I try to do is like to keep different levels of commitments, because you can do sort of, you can explore certain ideas in a very low effort way. So I might, like when I'm tired at night, I might spend an hour to read in a book about a certain topic that I'm not pursuing. So I'm always kind of doing a little bit sort of on every project in like low effort ways. But then at some point, of course, I have to go deeper. And then you get to the point where I'm like, I'm actually gonna have to sacrifice. I'm not gonna be able to write, I'll be able to write like 10% of the things I want to write. And how do I make that decision? So on a good day, the way I do the decision is I try to sort of think about, make a sort of prediction about what will make the biggest impact on my life. If I can work through these issues, it's gonna, this is something that I'm a little frustrated about in my life, or this is something where I feel like maybe I'm happy with it, but I think so let's say like I wrote a piece about agency recently. Like I feel pretty okay agentic, and I'm pursuing projects and I'm doing things, but I also know that like I've gotten better at that, and each step I've gotten better at, like starting my own projects and like cold calling people and reaching out and like finding clever solutions at problems. Each time I've done that, it's been really valuable to me. And then I make the prediction that if I could get 5% better at this, that's going to be extremely valuable. And so then I do that. Or in another case, it might be like I'm having some issues with prioritization or structure. And so maybe I'll sit down and think about that, because I think it's going to solve an important problem. And if I remove this bottleneck in my life, this frustration, that is the thing that I could solve in my life that's I predict will have the biggest impact on like the overall quality of my life or the life of my loved ones, or maybe that like some friend that I want to give advice to. So I'm trying, that's usually why I try to sort of ground myself back into to sort of reflect on what will make the biggest difference. And that's always a guess, always a prediction. But I try to sort of steer toward that. then of course sometimes that is just a very hard work because you're always going after the hardest, most important thing. So sometimes I'll just go like, I'm tired. I'm just gonna go with the thing that I'm most curious and excited about to give myself a treat, you know. So I also have to listen to sort of my needs for play. So it's usually like it ends up being every second essay or something as one where I go like hard on the most important thing, and one where I just, what do I feel fun about right now, and I'll do that. So those are like different models, but those are, I think, the two main models I have to sort of define. Like sometimes I'm just stupidly excited about grammar right now, so I'll just go for that, even if it's like pointless. And sometimes it turns out it's not pointless. That's like a big surprise at the end that's important, but sometimes it's just fun.
There's a question from Jamie about the use of language. Jamie, do you want to come on the line?
Yeah, so basically I was just wondering your hand's up. Is that
Yeah,
everything?
no, I'm just waving to you. That's the first time
right.
we meet.
What was I saying? Oh yes, so you speak at, well, I don't know how languages, but at least two, I'd assume. Well, so for each like topics, do you think in a particular language according to topic, or is it a kind of mishmash of all the languages you know kind of put together? And has like writing, especially kind of English, kind of impacted on how your internal dialogue works? Is it kind of taking over, or is it having no effect on you, basically?
Yeah, so yes, I speak two languages well. I speak Swedish and English well, and I can also sort of write professionally in Danish, but my pronunciation is absolutely horrific. And I also sort of read and speak Norwegian too, because it's similar to Danish. Yeah, so one thing I noticed, so when I started writing a blog, before that I always written in Swedish, and I was sort of trying to learn to write in English really hard in the beginning. Like, oh, like it's so annoying to write in your second language because you're like, oh, you don't have the tools at all. So like the first year was really hard, and I would have to sort of use Google Translate for things and stuff. And then eventually like I got good enough that I can just like think in English and write in English. And what I've noticed after that is that I catch myself more and more thinking in English, and I find that to be problematic because I feel like my sort of guess when I'm thinking in English is that I'm performing, because like English is my performance language because I write publicly in English. So when I'm thinking in English, it's like I'm on stage, and I don't want to be on stage when I'm thinking. So I try to think in Swedish, but I kind of force myself because I'm training myself to think in English by writing in English all the time. But it's kind of nice to have like two languages because it's like a red flag that I'm being performative, that I'm being like socially directed when I'm thinking. So yeah, I tried not to think in English.
Great. I want to switch tracks a little bit to talk about your essay on perception. So you say that perception is a controlled hallucination. What does that mean? And how has your awareness of perception as a hallucination shaped how you approach writing and relationships?
Yeah, it's a fun question. Yeah, so, well, to be clear, we're not 100% sure how this works in the brain yet, but as I understand it, as a total non-expert, the probably most reliable model of how the brain and perception works is sort of predictive processing. And what that model says is that actually you're not really sort of just streaming the world into your head and just seeing what's out there. Actually, what's happening is that you are, based on your previous experiences, you're generating predictions about what you're going to see out there. And you're generating sort of a mental model, a hallucination in your head. And then that kind of projects it down toward your eyes, right? And says, oh, we think this is going to happen in your eyes. And then at the same time, there's data streaming in from the eyes. And those are kind of compared. And is this prediction correct or not? And when the prediction is wrong, you feel surprised, like what? Why is that ball falling upwards or whatever? You predicted wrongly, and then you get like alert and there, and now the sort of the sort of model in your head, your sort of modeling of the world has to be updated, and you're more present. But in situations where you've sort of walked the same path to work all the time, your brain is going to be extremely good at predicting what it's going to see and happen. So you kind of totally switch off. So actually, since you're making correct predictions all the time, you're actually seeing the sort of hallucination, the model your head is doing mostly, right? It's not entirely that, because it's getting corrected by the data it's getting in. But if you are not getting surprised and feeling alert, it's not getting corrected a lot. So mostly you're actually just seeing your prediction of what's going on out there, and your prediction is mostly correct. And what follows from this, and you're asking me sort of how that reflects on my writing and relationships and so on. So let me first tell like a funny story, which kind of totally illustrates how like these hallucinations kind of work. When I was learning to speak Danish, like I came here, and and I was like, I got like the village priest like invited me to like a secret drinking party in the woods, and of course because he knew I didn't know anyone here, and so I met like there was all these priests and soldiers getting drunk in the woods. And I was hanging out there, and I started talking, and I didn't know Danish, but I was like trying to learn, and I was having a conversation. I felt like, oh, I'm having an actual conversation in Danish, right? Like, wow, like I'm so good. And we were talking about this Swedish author, right? And then like after 5 minutes, the guy I was talking to started like saying things about like that his father was like a American TV priest, and I was like, what? No, that's not at all true. And then I kind of realized, like, and we switched to English and like clarified, oh, he had been talking about a different topic for 5 minutes, but I was just like hearing a few words here and there instead of constructing a story, and that I thought I was having a conversation. I thought I was hearing what was going on, but I was only hearing my sort of hallucination based on my predictions about what he was actually saying, right? So that's a sort of a concrete example where it's very jarring how bad my predictions can be, and I still believe them. And so when I have that realization, right, that means that writing for me is a lot of process of seeing reality more clearly. I don't want to be stuck in that sort of hallucinatory, habitual way of thinking. And so I want to kind of break that predictive, like being stuck in that. I want to like rush into my eyes and see what's actually going on there. And to do that, you have to sort of make yourself surprised. And so I'm using writing a lot as a process of like actually stopping long enough to see what's going on there. So it could be as simple as just like I'll describe an apple tree, and then I'll write down what an apple tree looks like. And then I'll go look at the tree, and I'll ask myself, what am I wrong about here? Like what in my description does not fit here? And then I'll start notice all of these things that I didn't notice. I'll write those down. I'll look again. And like I'm trying to put myself in this kind of loop where I'm trying to capture reality and I'm getting wrong, but I'm trying to sort of slow down and like clearly articulate what I think I'm seeing so that I can notice where I'm wrong, and that sort of makes me see more. And all of a sudden you notice, if you do this, what say a flower or something, you'll notice there's so many details to a flower. There's like so much going on, and there's like super interesting to look at for like an hour, right? And the same thing can be true of ideas, right? So I've been talking about like how when I have an important topic, I'll sort of write it down, and then I'll ask myself, I'll interrupt myself, and it feels like a coherent argument, right? I'm talking about it, feels like I have a coherent position on this, but I write it down, and then I start interrogating myself, like, how can I figure out things I'm wrong about? How can I, or what predictions am I making here? And like trying to articulate those predictions. Does that actually match any data I could look at? Or like, what are the actual sort of examples of this? I'm in different ways trying to sort of expose more and more of the model I have in my head. It's like in science, right? So what science is good at is just like you're not just saying, so I think gravity is like that. You're trying to make very accurate predictions. Like Einstein, so like he famously sort of predicted that a star, if you looked at the sun, a star would be displaced by a precise amount of like arc centimeters or whatever, right? So it's a very absurdly precise prediction, and then they could actually go look at that, and it was true. But it's like trying to formulate these things that force you to go look at reality and surprise yourself and slow down, because I don't want to be caught up in this. I want to like get out of my sort of preconceived mental model of the situation. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but
It does. And I could be making a connection here, but it sounds like this is also added a lot of richness to your life. In another of your essays, you talk about how your life has become a lot more narrow as you focused on the things that are essential, but you've also found that it's incredibly rich. And I wonder if some of that comes from how you've become more perceptive and you've started noticing the smaller details and drilling into them more and more, so that even if something is as simple as, I think you talk about cycling across the same fields every day, you uncover the richness in that route that you take.
yeah, if you can get out of the habitual loop of just like
Yeah.
not seeing that field. But yeah, it does connect. So we were having a conversation earlier here with someone, I think with Mary, where we're talking about like how do I carve out time and making these sacrifices. Like, and what I found, right, is that there are two ways to get surprised, right, by reality. And one is to sort of go to a country you've never been in, and your predictions are going to be all wrong, and you're going to be so alive, and time is going to slow down. It's going to feel so alive because there's new impressions all the time, and you're not predicting them correctly. So you're like constantly getting surprised and alert. So that's kind of broad searching for novelty, right? Going broadly and like trying new things, and like, and some people go like crazy in that direction, like changing partners all the time. They're like trying different things. Like, fair enough, that's one way to do it. What I've sort of found that I prefer is to just like narrow down, because there's also like, if you like, for example, like, just take the simple example of a flower. Like, if you stay with a flower and sort of articulate what you see, and you make predictions and look and look and look, that's gonna be more and more information there. I was reading the diary of Charles Darwin recently, and like, he's so crazy about that. Like, he's a wonderful guy, you know. He's just going around all the time, and there's like a scene early in the book, like it starts like a normal book. You think it's just like a travel, and then he goes around and then sees like an octopus in the water, and then the book just goes like take a complete left turn, because like, and then I like started to go after it, and I got it into a crevice, and like he gets the hands on the octopus, and then he starts describing how it looks, and then he starts, you know, putting electricity on it, and he just starts doing things to this because he's just trying to see this octopus. Like, other people will just see the octopus, but he's just getting closer and closer and closer to the octopus. And you know, you could probably write like a PhD on just like the suction cup of an octopus, right? There's so much things there. So and I really like that type of novelty, where you look at a thing and it gets richer and richer and richer, right? And so it could be an octopus, but it can also be like your wife, right? So like, I spend so much time talking to my wife, and we're trying to sort of not get into habitual loops. We're always trying to sort of surprise each other or move the conversation forward and like find new levels. And when you do that over and over, like the kind of conversations you can have after 10,000 hours of like serious conversation with a person is like really cool. It's like, it's weird. You start speaking in a language that no one else speaks. It's like a cool experience. And I feel the same thing with writing. So I am personally very, I mean, I like to travel as well, but I think it's underrated, that kind of thing of just going really deep into like an octopus or a craft or a relationship, and just like, but it's harder, right? Because it's so much easier to get like into this place where you think you know who your wife is, or your husband is, or what an octopus is, right? And you have to be more structured and deliberate about like how you make this new and interesting again and again. But if you can get into that loop where you make it interesting, and the way you do that is by making prediction. Like, from what I know about this octopus, I predict that this is going to happen if I put electricity on it, right? And then you put electricity on it, and it turns out you're wrong. Now you're surprised. It's interesting. You start coming up with a new like PhD thing about electricity and octopuses, right? And it's going to be fun. And you're going to go to like an octopus conference, and you're going to make friends. So that's the short of it.
Great. So I want to move into talking a bit more about the intersection between writing and relationships and children, and then I'll also take audience questions. So you note on your essay on agency that you write for your daughters. How has that shaped and influenced your writing? Do you write for them outside your blog, or do you plan to introduce them to your writing at some point when they're older?
Yeah, my wife and I, we sort of think about that one thing we're doing with the blog is that we're sort of trying to make stabs on sort of chapters on a book that we want our kids to read at some point. And the oldest one is 8, so we're talking about these ideas, but she's still not really at the level where she could read. But I imagine like at 12, this is what would be like some amazing things that I wish Charles Darwin, it was the Voyage of the Beagle that I was referring to. And I find that to be motivating and to think about sort of what would be super valuable. What do I wish I knew when I was 15, and like what and so on, and like how can I because it's really motivating when you have kids because you care about them sort of at a deep level. So like trying to orient to what that is motivating to me. And the way I think about it too is a lot that I do not make any distinction between sort of anything, right? So getting a bit of better writer and a better father or is the same thing. And also it's like I'm thinking about like how can I teach my kids, right? How can I help them grow into flourishing human beings and like help them cultivate sort of intellectual and moral virtues and all of these things, right? Everything I'm thinking about them also applies to me. There's like there's no distinction, like because we're both human beings, and there's gonna be certain things that needs to be simplified for them. But I find that like once I had kids, I was forced to think more about like who do I want to, how do I want them to live and be, right? And the way I think about that is that I'm gonna be, because we're homeschooling them, right? So they're around us all the time, and that means I need to be the kind of person I want them to be, right? Because if I live the way that I hope they will live, and if I embody sort of intellectual virtues and I'm show humility and I'm kind and I like do all the things I do and I'm structured about solving my problems and learning whatever, right? That's gonna help them be that. So there's like this fine process of where I'm trying to think about like how to help them, but that kind of reflects back on me and deepens me. And sometimes I'm thinking about like how to solve my problems, but that helps me help them, right? So it's all the same, right? It's there's like um everything is the same, right?
So you wrote about the childhoods of exceptional people, and I really enjoyed that essay. And while reading it, I was curious, did the discovery through that essay influence you to homeschool your children? And what kind of childhood have you been trying to give them, drawing from some of the inspiration you received?
We knew we wanted to homeschool them before that. But I again, like feels like if we're gonna do this, we're gonna homeschool them. This feels like a thing that I should think through, and I have my vague intuitions, I have my feelings and what I think would work, but like this seems like I'm gonna be like taking care of these people for a long time, so it feels like it's worth taking 150 hours to like get a better understanding of this. And one way I chose to do it was just like look at a lot of people who have maybe I'm not 100% sure I would do the exact same sample of people as I did in that time, but like I did my rough sample of people had gone on to like live what I feel to be interesting and productive lives, right? And then I looked at their childhoods. So are there any patterns? What can I learn by looking at what their parents did, and so on? And a lot of it kind of confirmed intuitions I had. There's like some parts of it. I think I became a little bit more ambitious after reading that, and just like because you see a lot with a lot of these people, they're very. So I think the important, like if you're taking away one single thing from these biographies, is that the parents are extremely serious about cultivating a serious intellectual milieu for the kids. They're being taken seriously. So like Bertrand Russell, for example, when he's like 4 years old, he doesn't believe, he thinks the earth is flat. And his grandparents, he's living with his grandparents, and his grandparents actually like takes him to the sort of village priest who is like a amateur scientist, and has the amateur scientist sit down and like talk this through with the 4-year-old and trying to sort of deductively prove that the earth is round, right? So they're taking him seriously. Like they're not saying, oh, you're stupid, like whatever. They're taking him seriously, and they're putting him in like serious conversations, and they're having like scientists come live in the house and whatever, right? They're being around that. So it did. So I was sort of doing things in that direction, trying to be a role model, but just seeing like, oh, I could be more ambitious, I could be more clever about this, I could. That was fun to sort of think about that, see more opportunities, and I think maybe if something that changed my mind a little bit around is that like before that, like I really hated school, so like I sort of came at it from that, like once I got out of school, I started to learn and I could start to like pursue my project. That for me, it's like so I was at that point like, let's just get rid of all that and just start working on a project. That was sort of where I was starting from, and then sort of looking at these, I kind of realized that, well, there's maybe a little bit more to it, to education than that. You can do it well, and to start think about like, if the baseline is like having my kids working on interesting projects that they're excited about, but how can I sort of on the margin like be a bit more pedagogical and like structure that, and be more ambitious, and while like, and ambitious, by ambitious I don't mean like getting them into like Harvard or anything. I mean like getting them into being flourishing, competent versions of themselves in whatever path they choose to do. But like, again, I feel like I'm drifting from the question here.
No, that's very insightful. Another thing I remember from that essay is that you noted that when people do important work, often their obsessions grew out of boredom. Is that something that you try to introduce into your children's life? And how do you do that, given that as a society, it seems like many of us have come to view boredom as something to banish at all cost?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we think about that. It can be hard, right? First of all, the kids can get like really annoyed when they're bored. And also I can feel I should be hands-on all the time. Like if I'm the kid, like my 4-year-old is just sitting with some stones being bored, right? I want to go in that, let's do a lesson or whatever. But I think it's important to give that space because there's a lot of magic that comes from that boredom. So we try to really cultivate that a lot. They don't do screens. They watch like every second day. They watch for like 40 minutes cartoons in English to learn English. That's the only screen time they have. And then they get to be bored a lot. And so and like the 8-year-old, she's getting more bored, like because the 4-year-old, she's still like not getting bored that much, but 8-year-old's getting bored more and more. And she'll come and she'll be like, I don't know what to do, and be annoyed. And then we'll just say, well, I'm really excited to see what you'll come up to with, you know? And that usually works. Like I'm not gonna go in there and steer this. It's like I'm really excited about like what's gonna bubble up out of your mind. And you're like, 5 minutes later, she'll be climbing some tree or building something or whatever. But yeah, it's taken some restraint on my side of like not going in and making everything pedagogical. It's like I want the kids to just like sometimes just sit in a tree for an hour and something, and because there's a lot of you see that again and again, and I know it from my own, like it's just slow down enough for like things to start bubble up out of yourself. Like if you're always like someone steering, giving options, you don't have the time, and you need a lot of time for that to happen. And I think a lot of, I mean, most of us are sort of older, so we've probably had these experiences in our childhoods because like we were bored. And I think that a lot of the magic of childhood comes from that, because again, comes back to sort of perception and attention. What happens, like, so I was looking at the 4-year-old the other day, and she was sitting in the woods like with stones, right, like doing something with stones, whatever, for like 90 minutes while I was writing. And I can you just imagine like what's going on in her head? Like if you like, it's a very meditative thing, right? If you're sitting with stones, I mean, you should probably thinking some story or whatever, but she's like really like tuned in to those stones, right? And that's gonna make those stone come alive in a way they do not do for me, right? And I think a lot of the like magic of childhood is just like having that time to like really sink into ourselves and sink into like the trees and the stones and the books or whatever we're doing, and it's easy to deprive kids of that time and space to sink into those states.
So we have about 14 minutes left, so I'm going to start opening it up for questions from the audience. Tom, you had a question, so if you're here, I'd love for you to ask.
Yeah, sure. This might be a weird one, and the answer might be just no. We'll see. But is this, for example, in Don't Talk About the People You Date, you introduce the idea that you don't want to talk about it because you've got some interiority that they're not going to be able to understand, and by talking with them, they're going to reframe it in a certain way, and it's going to bias you in a way. My question is, do you find that sometimes the same happens, but with the process of writing or talking about your ideas, and what do you do then? You mentioned maybe that your language somewhat changes, and maybe that's an answer. I don't know.
Yeah, so first of all, so that is what you're saying. There's from I wrote a post called "Looking for Allies" about how I met my wife, which was sort of a list of advice for a friend who was single and wanted to marry, and he's actually married now, so that worked out. And one of the advice was like not to talk about people you're dating. I think that was probably one of the worst advice in that post, because I think if I wrote it again, I think there's a truth to it, but it needs to be phrased more deliberately, because like the thing that can go wrong sometimes and have it gone wrong in my life is when I start to try to explain, like if I'm talking to my friends, right, about people I'm dating, and they'll get really excited about certain things and like, oh, she seems amazing, and that makes me more excited about it, but they'll usually get excited about like cute things or things that are easy to explain. And often, like when I met Johanna, like my friends did not get excited about that at all. They didn't understand because like she's a little weird and it was hard for them to understand, but there was something really real there. And when I was talking about it, I got kind of smothered because but that was just like my friends being stupid, you know? Like if you have good friends, I think it's usually probably a good idea to talk a little bit, because otherwise you can get up in really bad places. So it's a question of like find the right balance there. But it is true that new things, new relationships, new ideas, new essays, new startup ideas, new whatever are fragile. They're gonna sound weird, and there it is important to give some space to things to like there comes a time where you want to air things out and get feedback on them and so on. But I think it's really important to have that space of this is my space. Like and I have certain ideas in my notebook that I've been like toying with for like 2 years, and they're still kind of weird. I don't know how to frame them, and if I were to bring them onto the limelight and put them on blog, I'd get uncomfortable and I'd start to shape them and censor myself. So I think it's important to have some kind of private space where you're alone, or maybe you have one or two close confidants who are just like yes men, who are like, let's go ahead, they're not closing anything down. But I think it's important to have some space like that to sort of incubate these weirder notions, right? Because sometimes like my best essays will come from things that will sound so stupid if I explain. I mean, you know, I'll start with like, oh, like I want to write an essay that has a lot of, you know, blue. You know, I want to have a blue feeling. And if I told you that, like, I'm gonna write an essay that has a really blue feeling, you're like, that's not even an idea, Henrik, right? And I'll be, oh yeah, I'm sorry, but it could have been a really good one, right? If I like blue, what blue? Maybe the ocean, right? And sadness, and what do I feel about sadness? Can I write something that is about sadness that's interesting and has a blue feeling to the texture? Like that could be a really good one, but it sounds stupid if I say it, right?
So as
Thanks.
oh, sorry, Tom, I'll let you respond.
No, thanks. That's all.
So as I was reading that essay on your relationship with Johanna, I was thinking about how feedback from friends and family can be useful for helping us see our blind spots about relationships. So I was curious if you think there are exceptions to that, or if you think there's a better way to collect that kind of feedback without talking about the relationship.
I don't know. It's so hard to. I mean, like the obvious fail mode of like not talking about it is that you'll like end up with some sociopath and you'll get up in this strange thing, and it'd be really good if your mom heard about it so she could like tell you to get your shit together. Um, so 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 there's like fail modes on both sides here. Uh, uh, but uh, if you have, but I think it's like, I mean, certain like in a relationship, I think it's okay to let a relationship like brew for a few weeks without talking to it with your friends. Like that's probably a good idea. Like get some feel for it. Like, what do I actually feel myself? You don't have to go talk to your friends like the first day, but it's probably good to get some feedback. But you also be again like a little bit, especially early on, a little bit like cautious about like finding people who are like maybe a little sensitive and not like confirmation bias and yes men, but also like not people who are too judgmental and so on, like because things are um yeah, definitely some of my friends are too judgmental. They judge ideas too early, and then you have to force it down their throats, and then they'll discover they're wrong about it. But it's that can be dangerous because you can get like uncomfortable around that idea or that relationship and like end things too early before it has time to bloom. So not sure at all about that I would probably rewrite that part if I wrote it now because that's I would need that's one thing I would need to for like 100 hours to think about the answer. Um,
Fair enough. But as you noted, all of your writing it's never static, right? You're always revisiting things. Mary, you had a question that I'll let you ask, and also want to encourage everyone else to ask questions either in the chat or by raising their hands.
I'd just like to make a really quick comment, Henrik. We homeschooled our children and we had a wonderful time doing it, and we decided to just completely eliminate all of those curriculums and just give them lots and lots and lots of experiences. And then in their final year of school, I took a whole year off and got them through their exams. They did excellently, and now they're absolutely brilliant human beings and just wonderful people. And so I hope that you continue your homeschooling. And the one thing that I wanted to say with regards to what Pierre George said was hanging out with young people is the most amazing thing. They just expand my mind so much, and so much new stuff comes through when there's all these young people around. It's really lovely. Really enjoy it.
yeah, thank you. I'll try.
Any other
Do we?
questions?
I don't see the hand, but maybe I can just jump in.
Yeah.
I'm really curious, like, since you've been talking, right, you say you pick a topic, you put 150 hours, you feed the compost, right? I like those metaphors, but I'm kind of curious what in practice does it look like? Because I tend also to read around a bunch of topics. I have a bunch of notes, but I feel my process is, I could make it better. And it seems to be something you've perfected or at least worked a lot on. So yeah, I'd be curious to hear more about what it looks like concretely.
Yeah. So, but I think you have to think about it sort of again as a design project, right? What is wrong with your current practice, and like how could you tweak that to try to solve the problem you're having now? And then you try that, and then it's gonna go wrong in a different way, and you tweak it, and you tweak it, and you tweak it. And I've been doing that for a long time, right? It's hard to say when it started, right? But I've been writing maybe a lot for like 20 years. And it keeps evolving. So in practice, what my note-taking system looks like today is that I use like Obsidian, which is sort of a note-taking app, which is nice because you can just like really easy make hyperlinks. So I'll write something and then I'll realize this is connected to this idea, and then I can just type really rapidly and create a link, so I can link together different thoughts I have, and then that means it's very easy to like create structures around my thought. Do you use something like that?
I do another version, but like with the hyperlink so I can tag things. Yeah.
And then and then when you're in that situation, then you can yeah, again, as I said, like start designing that. So you can think about like what kind of, so I'll structured one I had about this, and so for example, I have one note which lists all the books I've read, and then I've discovered that was a good way. So that so then because when you're able to link, you can just create immediately new structures for your thinking. So I might discover that maybe I want to structure my work completely differently. For example, a year ago I discovered I want to have all my books collected. Then I can just make a note, and then I write the titles of all the books I've ever sort of made notes about, and I link them, and all of a sudden now I have a page with links to all the books I've ever read. And that turned out, and then that was just an idea, and I tried that. It turned out to be really useful. I used it all the time. I have had other ideas like that where I've made a structure and it wasn't useful, and then I just like never go back to that note, right? So over time I find certain ways of structuring my information, and this might sound super abstract, right, if you haven't used a program like this, but it's just like just iterating on that again, like now my process is falling apart. Why is it falling apart? Like what kind of new structure could I build around? Could I structure my notes differently? Could I create some meta note that links to all the important notes? And like again and again, just like being very abundance mindset about it, and try a new setup until you find something that clicks for you. So what my setup looks like is that I have one note which collects all the essay ideas I have. I have one note that collects all the books I've read, and then I click on the links. I have all the quotes and all my thoughts on all the books. So that makes it really easy to find out that information. I also have another one which is like all of my compose, like all of the topics that I'm thinking about. And when I go into that, there'll be one, and then I don't know how detailed to get about any of this, but yeah, I'm just making different scenarios, and I'm reading books. I have you looked at like Andy Matuszak's note-taking system? Because like I think he structures it really well. So it's just like looking at how other people, because some people will publish their note-taking systems online, and you can go look at how other people structure their notes. Very useful, and you're just getting techniques, and and gradually you build up like a set of techniques to structure notes. And the important thing is just to notice, like my note taking is falling apart, so I'm not going back. I don't have any overview. What could I do differently? And then you try that, and you try again until you find something that works, because it's going to be different for different people, for different times in your life, for different kinds of projects. So I'm always like, my system changes every 6 months depending on sort of where I am at and what my priorities are. So I'm just like continuously creating new structures for my work.
So we're almost at time. Henrik, if you have room for one more question, I can combine.
Yeah, I don't have any hard, like I can go 5 minutes over.
Okay, great. So I think Olivia and Vivian had related questions on your relationship with the internet and how that's influenced your practice with writing. And then Vivian added that you've noted that a blog is a good way to find friends. And can you share more about that and how they influenced your writing? So if you could speak to that, that would be awesome.
Yeah, so I spent a long time not having internet basically at all. I was very much offline person, because I just felt like internet was like, I loved the internet in like the early 2000s, and then like when Facebook came around, I just got so bored, so I just stopped the internet completely. And then I sort of came back online in like 2020 or something, and I thought like, I'm gonna do this like deliberately and not get sucked into all the like bad patterns of using the internet, and like how can I use this very deliberately to pursue my goals. And one of the goals I had was that I wanted to make friends, because I had moved to a new country. I didn't have any close friends, and I wanted to have like intellectual conversations. And so what I did at that point was that there's so much. Well, I started to put some thoughts online, because you have to have some kind of proof of thinking, right? I feel the same way. Like if people reach out to me and I have to prioritize who I'm going to talk to. I'm usually going to look at something like their tweets or their blogs. You just get a sense, is this person serious or something? So you need to have something like that so people can know who you are. And the more personal and like you it is, the easier it is going to be for your kind of people to filter and find that you are the right kind of person. But then, of course, early on, no one's going to find you. So you have to go out and actually sort of look for people. And I like to think about sort of the mental model I have of the internet is it's like a city. It's like there's people everywhere talking and doing things. It can feel like this very like you're just consuming, but like if you go in on Wikipedia, for example, like that's a social media, right? You can like click in and see the people who have written, and there's going to be like a forum behind there where they're discussing different things, and you can start like finding, and then you can look like who actually wrote this Wikipedia page, right? It's this person, and what other pages have they written? You can actually like everywhere on the internet you can find people who are behind the Wikipedia page, or go on Reddit and you find people. So I would start to sort of actually sort of look for individual people and figure out and again, like it's a city, so like where are people hanging out, right? There's gonna be clubs and cafes and spaces, and where are they hanging out, and where are the good cafes? And I was sort of looking for that, because if I can go there and I can start talking and share my work, then people are gonna find me. So I started looking for that, and how do I find that? So I would like go to the least bad place I can find. Like with the little I know, this seems like an okay kind of place. And then I start talking a little bit there, look at who is there. And then I would look at sort of, if you're on Twitter, for example, right, and you see that someone's interesting, you can see who are they following, and you can start look at the followers, and then you start looking there, and then you can sort of travel on the sort of social graph. Or if I started posting on Less Wrong, for example, which was a forum that I somehow stumbled across, and then I met some people there, and then they sort of told me there was another forum that I could publish on, and which was like Slate Star Codex Reddit, and I started publishing things there, right? And then I met other people, so I was not like it was like looking for the most interesting people, and then looking at the other places they were hanging out. And then once I started putting things out, I was sort of very aggressive when I put things on like Reddit, and if I got some comment that was like remotely interesting, I would like DM them like, do you want to go on a Zoom call with me and talk to me? And I would start talking to them, and some of these people were interesting, and then I would also be totally shameless, like, who else should I be talking to? Right? I was like very actively asking for recommendations, and gradually that way I started to map out and understand sort of the hidden city on the internet, because there are like people who are writing all the Wikipedia pages and who are writing all the blog posts. You just have to kind of get behind the facade and see the hidden city, and then you get sort of introductions, and then that starts to snowball, because you could start to meet people. They started reading my blog, they started commenting, emailing me. I was starting talking to them, and they show you around the city, and over time you sort of learn how that is, and that city is going to look different for every person, right? Because it's like an individual city, because it's sort of shaped by your interest and the part of the social graph that you gravitate towards.
So to close, Henrik, what are you thinking of exploring next on Exploring Flatland? And are there any questions or topics you wish more people would reach out to you about?
Yeah, so I am currently trying to wrap up an essay that goes really deep on problem solving, and like specifically like solving messy problems of the kind of, let's say, like how do you design a really beautiful garden, or how do you figure out what to do with your life? These like big messy problems, how can you approach those kinds of problems? I've been thinking very hard and long for like 200 hours about that. So hopefully that will be done soon. So yeah, I think I'm pulling a lot on that thread now, and trying to sort of go deeper on it, because I wrote a post about agency, and that was kind of an overview, and I'm trying to go deeper on specific sort of sub skills on how to sort of construct a life and navigate, and get deeper and more specific on that. And what would I want people to reach out to me about? More odd things, more surprising things. Like I really like it when there's like a odd connection. Like I don't need to have what I've said reflected back to me. It's like if there's like a vague connection, and someone sends me a reflection about like early Indian philosophy or whatever. That'd be super interesting to me. So I want to be surprised.
Wonderful. Anything else you want to share with the group before we wrap?
Well, I'm really glad we got to have this moment together. I hope you've had a pleasant time. I've had, though I always get a little self-conscious when I'm the one talking all the time, but that's sort of the deal of the game here. I hope that was okay with you. And I think it's really beautiful that we get to meet like this, and it's I mean, this is sort of a tiny part of that sort of hidden city online, and I think there's so much untapped potential in like building connections and like finding people to share ideas with, and this is like I think it's a beautiful example of that, and I hope you've had a good time, and I sort of encourage you to find your people and do cool stuff.
What's the best way to follow your work? I know you're on x.com and also Substack. Is there another way you prefer to be contacted?
Now, the Substack is like I'm trying to get off X because I'm kind of tired of that. So I'm doing almost everything on Substack now. So yeah, go there, and if you if you subscribe and I send out an email, so the secret is that if you reply to that email, I get the answers. So you can always reach me that way. But like I don't advertise that everywhere. But you seem to be reasonable people, so you can always reach me that way.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for spending your Sunday with us. I'm really grateful for everyone who has joined as well. This was a great conversation. I'm so excited to see what you write next on Escaping Flatland. So thank you again for joining, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Bye.